What if the man your staff laughed at turned out to own the entire company? He walked in wearing a tattered coat. They mocked his shoes, ignored his words, and humiliated him in front of strangers. But what they didn't know was that he built the very empire they worked for, brick by brick. Stay with us? Because when he comes back, the entire store learns the price of disrespect. The glass doors to Whitmore and Reed Jewelry slid open with a soft chime as Thomas Reed stepped inside, his shoulders hunched beneath a threadbare coat, scarf tucked tightly beneath his chin, and shoes scuffed from too many winters. The store glittered like a temple, light bouncing off glass cases lined with diamonds, emeralds, and polished gold. Every surface gleamed, every smile was rehearsed. Behind the counter, a pair of sharply dressed sales associates glanced up and immediately exchanged a look. Lost, or just cold one whispered, probably wandered in from the bus stop. The other smirked. Thomas didn't seem to hear, or maybe he did and chose to rise above it. His steps were slow but steady, his eyes scanning the cases with quiet curiosity, hands clasped gently behind his back. "Can I help you, sir?" A tall man in a slick black vest asked with a smile too tight to be kind. "I'd like to see that necklace," Thomas said, voice calm but gravel-edged with age, nodding toward a velvet tray holding a delicate white gold chain with a teardrop sapphire. The salesman didn't move. "That piece starts at $15,000, he said flatly. Thomas nodded. "Yes, that one?" The other associate stifled a laugh, nudging her coworker. "Maybe he means the box." The tall man adjusted his cufflinks. "We prefer to handle serious inquiries only, sir." A younger employee glanced up from the back, eyes flicking between the old man and the display. She opened her mouth, but the others shut her down with a look. Thomas looked from one face to another, reading them the way a man reads weather in the sky. Telltale signs of a storm brewing where there should have been warmth. He turned slowly, eyes falling on a mother and daughter browsing a few feet away, both now staring at him like he was out of place. And for a moment, he felt like he was... But only for a moment. "Thank you anyway," he said softly, voice full of something deeper than disappointment. As he made his way toward the door, the laughter behind him was quiet, but sharp enough to cut glass. And as the door clicked shut behind him, no one noticed the security camera overhead had been watching. The whole time, Thomas stood just inside the entrance, a step from the warmth, a breath away from turning back, but something in him, something older than pride and quieter than rage, kept his feet planted on the pristine marble. He turned once more toward the display cases, eyes pausing on a locket, small, simple, silver, the kind a man might give not to impress, but to remember. "May I see that one?" he asked gently, pointing with a slow hand. The tall salesman didn't move. He raised an eyebrow and scoffed. "Sir, that's a Tiffany-laced platinum heirloom design. Limited run." "You understand what that means?" His voice dripped with polished contempt. "It's rare, sir, not for window shoppers." The girl at the back, the only one who hadn't laughed, shifted uncomfortably but said nothing. Thomas's fingers flexed slightly at his sides, but his voice stayed steady. "I understand quality. I also understand manners." That broke something. The second associate, a younger man with slicked back hair, snorted and leaned against the counter. "Look, old-timer, maybe check down the street. There's a pawn shop 2 blocks over. Real friendly, no velvet ropes." Another customer chuckled behind him, murmuring something about people wasting time. A middle-aged woman in pearls stepped aside as if Thomas might spill poverty onto her heels. The sales team didn't even flinch. "If you're not going to make a purchase," the manager added, stepping into view now with a cold smile and clipped voice, "we're going to kindly ask you to leave, sir." This store isn't a museum. Thomas looked at him then. Not at the suit, not at the pinstripe tie or the gold name badge, but at the man behind the glass eyes, the voice that had spoken those same words to dozens of others he never thought twice about. He held that gaze for one long, still second, then nodded. "I see." He turned and walked slowly toward the door, shoulders straighter than they had been when he entered. Behind him, someone whispered, Probably just wanted to steal something. Good catch, another voice laughed. That coat looks older than this store. The door opened with the same soft chime. And this time, it sounded like mockery. As Thomas stepped back into the cold, no one thanked him. No one apologized. No one even looked up. Because to them, he had never really been there. The air outside bit through Thomas's coat as he stepped into the street, but it wasn't the cold that stung. It was the heat of humiliation burning under his skin, the kind that seeps in slowly and stays long after the doors close behind you. He paused under the awning, snow swirling in the wind like shards of memory, and turned once to glance back through the storefront glass. Inside, the manager was already laughing with the two sales associates, one mimicking a hunched walk, the other pretending to peer through the glass like a confused old man. A couple of younger customers at the counter giggled, phones out, one of them pointing. You think he even knew what that locket was? Doubt he could afford a shoelace in this place. A teenage boy held up his phone and began filming through the window. Let's go viral. Homeless grandpa tries to buy diamonds, he snickered. From behind the register, the slick-haired clerk waved mockingly at the glass. Smile, sir, you just made our afternoon. The girl in the back, the only one who hadn't laughed, started to step forward again. But the manager caught her with a glance that said, "Don't." She froze. Thomas stood still, his reflection caught in the showroom glass, surrounded by glittering displays of wealth he had built his life avoiding, and yet somehow still found himself judged by. A security guard approached him from inside, opening the door with forced politeness. "Sir, I need to ask you to step away from the building." His voice was flat, tired, and procedural. Thomas met his eyes and, for the first time, the guard's tone softened. "Sorry, orders." Thomas nodded. "Of course." He stepped back, shoulders square now, as snow began to gather on the brim of his worn hat. The door closed behind him with a final, mechanical click, like a vault ceiling shut. Not to protect treasure, but to keep humanity out. No one came after him. No one said they were sorry. Inside, they returned to their rehearsed smiles, their polished glass, their golden cages. And outside, the man they had mocked turned and walked down the street slowly, coat flapping behind him like a flag they had all forgotten how to salute. But they hadn't seen his eyes. They hadn't heard what he whispered into the wind as he disappeared into the storm. Noted. The wind howled down the alley as Thomas turned the corner, snow catching in the folds of his coat, but he didn't shiver. His boots crunched over frozen pavement, steps steady, unhurried, like a man carrying something much heavier than anger. Clarity. He reached an old iron bench beneath a flickering street lamp and sat slowly, exhaling like the weight of the entire store had just lifted off his back. From his inner coat pocket, he pulled out an object that looked wildly out of place in his weathered hands. An old flip phone, scratched and scuffed, but still working. He opened it carefully, like it held secrets instead of circuits, and dialed a number with slow, deliberate fingers. 1 ring, 2, then a voice. Yes, calm, efficient, alert. "Yes, Mr." Reed Thomas's voice came low, even and cold as the air around him. 6th Avenue, Whitmore location. I want the full footage pulled. Customer treatment. Audio included. Email it to me tonight. The man on the other end didn't hesitate. Understood. And Jonathan, yes. Sir Thomas leaned forward, eyes locked on the distant storefront now glowing like a lie in the storm. Have the regional director in my office by 9, no excuses, and don't let anyone at the store know who I am. Not yet. Copy that. Thomas flipped the phone shut with a soft snap, the sound lost in the wind. He sat still for another moment, snow beginning to coat his shoulders, before finally standing. He didn't look back again. There was no need. The storm had already begun, but it wasn't in the sky. It was in the silence of a man who had been publicly stripped of dignity, and chose, instead of fury, precision. As he disappeared down the block, a pair of teenagers passed him without a glance, just another old man in the snow, but somewhere far above them. In corporate towers and silent boardrooms, Alarms were about to ring. Not because a billionaire had been insulted, but because the quiet one, the kind one, the invisible one, had just spoken, and when Thomas Reed speaks, entire empires listen. The sun rose over the city like it always did, casting gold over steel and glass. But in the heart of Whitmore and Reed's global headquarters, a different kind of heat was building. One that came not from light, but from fear. Inside the executive boardroom on the top floor, a dozen regional leaders sat in silence, their eyes darting toward the head of the table, where a man in a charcoal suit, mid-30s, smartly groomed and perpetually tense, adjusted his cufflinks with trembling fingers. His name was Daniel Grayson, regional director of sales, and the last call he'd received had ended with 3 words: "He's on his way." The door opened without announcement. Thomas Reed stepped inside. No coat, no scarf, just a dark tailored suit that fit him like a secret. The room stood up instantly, but he didn't tell them to sit. He walked slowly to the head of the table, set a leather folder down without a word, and opened it. A single sheet inside, still image, security footage. Frame 1. Thomas is being laughed at beside the sapphire display. Frame 2. The manager waving security forward. Frame 3. A close-up of the young associate sneering. The date and time in the corner. Yesterday, no one spoke. Then Thomas looked up, and the room felt colder than the snow he'd walked through. For those of you who've forgotten, my name is Thomas Reed. I'm not the brand ambassador. I'm not the face. I am the name. He tapped the table once. Hard. Reed. As in the Reed in Whitmore and Reed. He let that sink in. A few executives blinked as if trying to remember whether they'd ever met him in person. Most hadn't. I founded this company in 1971 with a partner and a promise. That we would bring elegance without arrogance. That we would make beauty accessible and honor the dignity of every customer, from the woman buying a $10 charm to the man purchasing a $10,000 ring. Yesterday, that promise was broken. He held up the photo again. Buy your store. Buy your people. Buy a culture that now values wallets more than warmth. Grayson cleared his throat, a voice brittle. Mr. Reed, I assure you, this is not who we are. Thomas turned his eyes on him, and Grayson froze mid-sentence. You don't assure me. Thomas said, you show me. You prove it. Because from what I saw yesterday, the store with my name on it has become a mirror of everything I built this company to reject. He folded the photo slowly, effective immediately. The entire management team of 6th Avenue is suspended pending review. Every store in this district will undergo anonymous ethics testing within the next 90 days. And any employee who fails to treat every customer with no matter what they wear, drive, or carry, then will be dismissed. No appeal. The silence now was absolute. No one blinked. Thomas looked around the table, then smiled faintly. But it wasn't a smile of satisfaction. It was a warning. I don't care if they come in wearing rags. I don't care if their shoes are torn, because the next man your people laugh at might be me again. And with that, he walked out, leaving behind nothing but the echo of his steps. Oh! And the beginning of a reckoning no one saw coming. The morning air was crisp, the city just beginning to stir as the staff at the 6th Avenue store polished the glass cases and rehearsed their smiles, completely unaware that the man they humiliated had returned, not in rags, but in silence and power. The same store that had scoffed and laughed now stood like a stage about to face its reckoning. The door opened. Not with the soft chime of a forgotten old man, but with the hush of inevitability as Thomas Reed stepped inside, flanked by corporate executives, legal counsel, and a quiet camera crew capturing every breath. Gone was the threadbare coat and the worn boots. Today, he wore a tailored navy suit that whispered respect and authority with every movement. The moment the manager looked up and recognized him, the color drained from his face. Sir, if we had known, he began, but Thomas held up a single finger, and the words shriveled mid-air. Customers turned, confusion spreading as murmurs swept across the floor. The tall salesman stepped back slowly, his fake smile now a frozen rictus of dread. Thomas walked straight to the sapphire case, the very spot where he had once stood invisible. He paused, turned to face the employees, and his voice, low, calm, devastating, cut through the silence like a scalpel. 2 days ago, I came here wearing a coat older than this location. I asked for help. What I received was contempt. He looked at each face slowly, letting the weight of his presence settle like dust on glass. I wasn't here to test your product knowledge or your upselling skills. I was here to test something far more important. Your decency. The manager stepped forward, sweat lining his collar. If we'd only known... That's the tragedy, Thomas interrupted, his gaze sharp. You should have treated me with kindness, not because I'm Thomas Reed, founder and majority owner of this company, but because I was a human being who walked through your door. Gasps rippled. A woman near the register dropped her brochure. The trainee near the back, Maya, covered her mouth in disbelief. Thomas stepped past the frozen manager and walked to her, the only one who hadn't mocked, who had reached for a glass of water before being silenced. He looked her in the eyes. You saw what they didn't. You paused. You hesitated. And in that hesitation, I saw humanity. He turned back to the room, effective immediately. This location's management team is suspended pending internal review. All employees will undergo mandatory retraining focused on empathy, dignity, and how to serve every customer. Not just the ones you think can afford it. Then he turned back to Maya, reached into his coat, and pulled out a small velvet box. And as for you, how would you like to manage this store? She gasped, tears welling. Sir, I don't know what to say. Thomas smiled, gently now. Say yes. And as she nodded, overwhelmed, the room was no longer filled with diamonds or shame. It was filled with the unshakable truth. The richest man in the building was the one they had once pushed out the door. And the most valuable gem in the room was integrity. The news spread like fire through glass. Silent at first, then unstoppable. Within hours of Thomas Reed's quiet storm inside the store, headlines began to circulate. Whispers turned into phone calls, and the entire company felt the weight of a reckoning that could not be rehearsed away. Back at 6th Avenue, the once confident manager stood in the office doorway, tie loosened, voice shaking as he pleaded into a phone. No one on the other end answered. The tall salesman sat pale on a velvet stool, his swagger gone, replaying his own laughter in his mind like a curse he couldn't rewind. Outside the store, a growing crowd had gathered. Not to shop, but to watch. Some came because they heard a billionaire had shown up dressed like a nobody. Others came because they wanted to see what justice looked like when it wore a suit and carried receipts. Inside, Thomas stood near the register where they had once ignored his quiet request, his hands folded gently as corporate security arrived, not to protect him, but to escort the guilty. He didn't yell, he didn't rage, he simply spoke, his voice calm and clear. To lead is to set a standard. To represent my name is to live by it. What happened here was not a mistake. It was a reflection of what you've allowed to grow in place of respect. The manager stepped forward, desperate now. Mr. Reed, please, I've worked here 15 years and learned nothing, Thomas said, unmoved. Not a single customer you saw this week will remember what you wore, but they'll never forget how you made them feel. He looked at the tall salesman. You laughed at me when I stood in silence. Let's see how well you perform under it. He turned to security. Escort them out, permanently. As the men were led away, heads down, Thomas turned to the security guard who had quietly asked him to step away that day. Not cruelly, but with quiet discomfort. You followed orders, Thomas said, but you showed restraint, decency. That matters to me. The guard blinked, confused. Sir, you've been promoted. Head of Regional Floor Security, starting today. The man's lips parted in shock. You're serious deadly, Thomas replied, and I expect you to lead by example. Every time someone steps through that door, no matter what they're wearing, the store stood silent, employees stunned. A few were even tearful. Customers outside began clapping. First a few, then dozens, as if the world had been waiting to applaud something truly good. And in the middle of it all, Thomas Reed, once dismissed, once mocked, stood quietly, not as a man wielding power, but as a man restoring value to something even rarer than diamonds' human dignity. The morning light spilled through the glass storefront like nothing had changed, but inside, everything had. The marble floors still gleamed, the jewelry still sparkled beneath perfect lighting, but behind the counter, where she once stood unnoticed, Maya now wore a name tag edged in gold that simply read, "Store Manager." Her hands fidgeted beneath the counter, heart pounding in her chest like it was trying to break through the silence. Just days ago, she had been invisible. Just a soft voice, a pair of nervous eyes that didn't laugh when the others did. She hadn't spoken, hadn't intervened, but she had seen what was wrong. And Thomas Reed had seen her. The door chimed gently. She looked up. He walked in alone, dressed in a simple coat. Not the billionaire in a boardroom, but the same man they had once pushed out. No entourage, no announcement, just presence. Maya's breath hitched as he approached the counter. She straightened, unsure if she should speak. He placed a small envelope on the glass between them and nodded. "You may not have said much, but you didn't say anything, and that matters." Her fingers shook as she picked it up. Inside was more than paper. It was a full corporate scholarship, a letter of commendation, and a handwritten note in clean script. "You hesitated because you felt it. That's what makes a leader." Her eyes welled. "I wasn't brave. You didn't join the laughter," he said quietly. "That's where bravery begins." He turned to go, but before he reached the door, Maya found her voice. "Mr. Reed." He stopped. "I won't waste this." He looked back, eyes steady. "I know." And then he walked out. Not as a man reclaiming dignity, but as one who had passed it on. And for the first time since the store opened, the most valuable thing inside wasn't behind glass. It was standing proudly at the counter, wearing a quiet name tag, and changing everything. The footage went viral within 24 hours. Not because it was dramatic, but because it was real. No background music, no filters. Just a grainy security recording of an old man being dismissed like dust on a velvet display, followed by another clip from the next day. The same man walking in with power that didn't shout, didn't need to. Millions watched in silence as Thomas Reed calmly rewrote what it meant to lead. News anchors called him the billionaire in disguise. Influencers dissected every second, and former employees began posting their own stories. Full, some ashamed, others inspired. But Thomas didn't seek the spotlight. He didn't answer interview requests or post statements. Instead, he stood at a podium 1 week later at the annual company summit, alone beneath a single warm light, wearing no tie, no flash, just truth. "I built this company with one belief," he said, his voice firm but raw. "That value isn't just in diamonds. It's in how you make people feel. And somewhere along the way, we got too polished, too proud. We lost our reflection." He held up a printed still from the footage. The moment Maya reached for a water glass. "This," he continued, "this is what saved us. Not profits, not strategy, but someone who chose compassion in a room full of performance." The crowd was still, executives leaning forward, some teary-eyed, some guilty. "I was born with nothing," Thomas said. "I know what it feels like to be dismissed before you open your mouth. I swore I'd never build something that made others feel that way. And I won't start now." He announced a new initiative, the Reed Standard, and a company-wide mandate that required not just customer satisfaction, but personal dignity. Secret shoppers would now be actors dressed in rags, as elders, immigrants, or single parents, not to punish, but to remind. And those who passed the unseen tests would be rewarded like Maya was, not with plaques, but with purpose. The applause didn't come fast. It came slowly, like a rising tide. But when it came, it thundered. Later, Thomas stepped outside the building into the cool evening air, alone again. A young employee rushed up to him with wide eyes. "Sir, Do you ever regret hiding who you are? Thomas smiled softly. No, he said, because the only way to know who someone really is to meet them before they think you matter. And with that, he walked into the dusk. Not with fanfare, but with a legacy no spotlight could outshine. Weeks passed, and the world kept spinning. But inside the 6th Avenue store, something had shifted permanently. Not in the display cases or the lighting, but in the posture of the people who now stood behind the counters. There was no longer laughter at the quiet ones, no side glances at worn shoes or hesitant voices. Every customer was greeted the same way, like they mattered before a price tag did. And then, one snowy afternoon, just before closing, the door chimed once more, soft and familiar, as Thomas Reed stepped inside, wearing the same coat he had worn the day they laughed him out. But this time, no one blinked, no one hesitated. Maya was already moving toward him with a warm smile. "Welcome back, Mr. Reed," she said gently, her voice steady with confidence. He glanced around the store, nodding at the subtle changes, the smiles that reached eyes, the chair now offered beside every display, the handwritten sign near the door that read, "Everyone has a story. We're honored to be part of yours." He didn't browse the diamonds. He didn't inspect the staff. He simply walked the floor like a man visiting an old friend. A young couple at the counter was picking out engagement rings. The woman whispered, "That's him, isn't it?" Her partner nodded. "The billionaire?" But Thomas heard, and he turned to them with a smile. "Not a billionaire," he said kindly. "Just someone who still believes kindness is more valuable than gold." The couple smiled, unsure how to respond. As he reached the exit, a small boy tugged at his sleeve, his face pressed to the glass case. "Are you the diamond man?" the boy asked with innocent wonder. Thomas crouched slowly, looked him in the eye, and replied, "No, son, I just look for the ones who shine." The boy giggled, and Thomas winked before rising. He pushed open the door, and as the chime rang above him once more, no one saw him as a stranger. He didn't walk out smaller than the store. He walked out bigger than the brand. Because in a world obsessed with sparkle, he had reminded everyone that the brightest thing in the room was never the diamond. It was the dignity we chose to give each other. They thought he was beneath them. Just another poor old man with no business walking among diamonds. But he didn't need wealth to prove his worth. He was the one behind it all. He didn't shout. He didn't threaten. He simply reminded them. Dignity doesn't wear a price tag. If this story moved you, well, share it. Because the person you're overlooking today might own the world tomorrow.